Good morning. For those who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Kantz. I am the Director of Family Ministries here at Millersville Church. And I am happy to be here this morning with you to talk about God's work in generosity. So each week this month, we are considering God's work through common elements of our lives, things like meals, like generosity and gratitude and thanks. So I would like to start today's examination of generosity by telling you a story that involves pizza and swearing. I saw some eyebrows go up. I am not going to swear at you this morning, but this is a true story of God's work through generosity, and it happened just a couple of weeks ago at a local pizza shop. Wayne and I had placed an order online for a couple of pizzas. We left our kids to fend for themselves for a little bit so that we could grab our meal and spend a few minutes chatting together after a long week. The romance of a pizza run. And when we opened the door and entered the store, there were at least 4 other people in the waiting area there, and they all gave us like a little bit of a look. The counter and the register were empty. No one came to greet us or ask us about our order, but we could see lots of movement just a couple of feet away, and we could hear very clearly the voices of 2 of the workers, and they were saying, "Well, I tried calling again and she didn't pick up. Well, someone else just came in. You want to go see?" There was lots of back and forth talk peppered with not the tame swears, the big ones. And over the next 5 minutes or so, I could just feel the tension in the room mounting as more people came in after us, and each one quietly asked, "Have you been helped?" And they were answered with, meanwhile, the workers behind the counter continued, "I'm trying to make this pizza good. Someone paid $20 for this pizza. Is yours even in the oven yet? I'm trying to call her to get here. She's not coming. Just make the pizza." This scene was really tense. It felt frantic. And there was frustration all around. And none of it was the fault of anyone there. Well, finally, one man's pizzas were ready. He had been sitting quietly the whole time, just looking at his phone, and he stood up. I didn't know what he would say when he got to the counter. Was an explosion coming? Was he gonna let him have it for how rude they were being and how long he had been waiting? His face was unreadable. And then as he took his pizzas, he leaned forward a little and he said, "You're in a tough spot. Good luck tonight." And would you just take a collective exhale with me now? It was like there was suddenly so much more air in that room. And that in itself is my God at work in generosity moment. It happened in me. As I witnessed this man's generous posture, and I felt the tension and the annoyance in my body dissipate. But it was more than that too, because the next person who got their pizza said, keep going, you're doing a good job." And then it was our turn. And I found that a generous space had opened up inside me that wasn't there a couple of minutes ago. Well, let's open our Bibles this morning to another generosity story. If you have your Bible in front of you or want to open on your app, let's go to Exodus 36. We were there last Sunday at Kidspace. We'll go there again this morning. Exodus 36. So the summary we need before entering Exodus 36 is that God tasked Moses and his people with building the tabernacle, the place that he'd come and dwell with his people. And he gave very specific and very elaborate plans. And remember, they are in the wilderness when they receive this job. So, let's read. Ev, can you click me over? Thanks. There we go. Okay. Let's read verses 2 to 5. So they've received this job. And then Moses summoned Bezalel and Aholiab and every skilled person to whom the Lord had given ability and who was willing to come and do the work. They received from Moses all the offerings the Israelites had brought to carry out the work of constructing the sanctuary. And the people continued to bring free will offerings morning after morning. So all the skilled workers who were doing all the work on the sanctuary left what they were doing and said to Moses, "The people are bringing more than enough for doing the work the Lord commanded to be done." What a beautiful picture of a God-shaped community. The Lord gave ability, and the people who were willing gave willingness. Now, how is that possible? I am asking you that this morning as a person who wants to be more generous, and it has not come easily to me. Many of you are familiar with this people's patterns, right? This is a people who do not have a great track record when it comes to giving and receiving. I mean, this is the same group who were grumbling about having no food when their trip to the desert started. And they told Moses, "We might as well have just died enslaved in Egypt." This is the same people whose patience with Moses was so thin that while he was on the mountain receiving God's law, his instructions for life, they built their own golden calf god. The same Israelites. And now they're giving so cheerfully and so generously that they have to be told to stop. How did they get here? Because I want to go too. Ev, it's not going again. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think they got there slowly. One step at a time through a desert. With God showing them patiently and steadily and faithfully over time a picture of his ways. He was providing for them daily in the wilderness, that place that had reduced them to their most basic of needs. Every day, without fail, they woke to find manna covering the ground. In a desert, they were not going to go hungry. And I wonder, how many days do you think it was before they just expected for that manna to be there when they woke up? Before they let themselves depend on it, like the sun coming up. And so I want to ask you, do you know what your manna looks like? Do you trust that God will provide it without fail? That is a step toward generosity. So the kind of giving that God's people did in Exodus 36, the eager, the cheerful, the abundant, the excessive even kind that reflected God's character, it would not have been possible without a grounded trust in and reliance on God to provide what they needed. They gave morning after morning, just as God gave manna. This is God at work through generosity. He goes first. It reminds me of that verse from 1 John 4. We love because he first loved us. He shows the way. So I think the wilderness time was a relearning time for the Israelites. How to live and be free as God's people and not as Pharaoh's slaves. Old Testament scholar, you heard Pastor Ryan mention him earlier, Walter Brueggemann says, before Pharaoh, God's people were marked by his abundance. In the garden, God says, be fruitful and multiply. To Abraham and Sarah, he says, all nations will be blessed through you. Abundance. And now with Pharaoh, Brueggemann says, for the first time in the Bible, someone says, there's not enough. Let's get everything. God's people lived enslaved in that system of scarcity long enough that they carried it with them. Imagine what scarcity might have whispered to the Israelites in the desert. Can I turn over this gold to build this tabernacle? If I do, how am I going to have the money, the resources to buy supplies that I'll need to build a house in this promised land? Or can I give this bolt of fabric? Who knows how long we're going to be in this desert? I'm probably going to need it. And we know what scarcity sounds like and looks like too. Maybe it's, I didn't get enough sleep again. I didn't get enough done today. Or it sounds like, I need to fight for my share of any good thing, or I'm not going to get it. Or I need to take more now because there might not be any later. Maybe it sounds like protecting what I do have will help me avoid getting hurt. Maybe it sounds like someone else would do this better than I can. Maybe it sounds like I cannot understand, respect, be friends with, I don't have enough in me, the person who voted for. So we know what scarcity sounds like. And naming before God the ways that scarcity has distorted our internal scripts, I want to tell you this morning, that's a step toward generosity. It's the place of allowing God to access and heal what is ungenerous in us, to draw us toward his character and his heart of abundance. So the question in the bulletin, if you have one, you can kind of look, there are some questions in there for you this morning. Is this: what barriers to generosity do you notice in your life? And I would encourage you to take some time to sit with that question this week as you're able. Just you and God. Maybe journaling, maybe reflecting on some specific moments where you have actually been generous and the ones where you haven't. That may not be an easy thing to look at. We'd rather avoid it. It's vulnerable, it's honest. I'll tell you, when I let myself go to that place with God, He has met me with an abundance of gentleness. We sang, "Grace flows down and covers me." We need that covering of grace. I think that's the only way we can stand to see ourselves as we really are. So let's take a moment to consider another story of generosity. And this is where Jesus meets his disciples in their place of scarcity as he patiently is teaching them how to be his people. And for that, we'll turn to Mark chapter 6. So Jesus is with his disciples, and he has a crowd following him. And he's teaching, and he's healing people. And in Mark 6, let's start with verse 35. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" You give them something to eat. So here we go. It's a familiar story of too much and not enough. There are too many people. There are too many needs. We're in a deserted place. And Jesus, are you really asking us to spend half a year's salary on just one meal? Really? And it's ironic, just like for the Israelites who learned scarcity in Egypt, in the land of plenty, and generosity in the desert, Jesus is here in this deserted place, and that's where he's going to show his disciples something about generosity. "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." This is Jesus, I think, patiently allowing their worry and their frantic, "How are we going to do this thing?" to just roll off him. What do you actually have is what he asks them. So you don't have the money, my friends, or you think you don't have the money, or you don't want to spend all that money on one meal. Okay, so you don't have that. But what's in your hands? Would you bring that? And then look at the verbs of what Jesus does next in Mark 6. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves, and then he gave them to his disciples to distribute among the people. He takes them. He blesses them. He breaks them. And he gives them. The cool thing is he gives them to his disciples and they get to be part of this miraculous moment. Because the next thing that happens is they all ate and were satisfied. 5,000 people. 5 loaves. 2 fish. What's in your hands? This is the simple and the profound truth of God at work in generosity. The abundance, the miracle of abundance, the big expansive part, it's His. And the small, simple step of offering was theirs. And it's ours too. I love that one of our 9 BIC core values is living simply. And here's why. Because when we ground ourselves in simple, we're freed from the barriers to generosity. The core value is defined this way. I'll read it to you. We value uncluttered lives, which free us to love boldly, give generously, and serve joyfully. So where do you need a little bit more simple this November? Is it eating this simple manna meal? I mean, maybe that means actually simplifying your meal planning, but maybe it's the metaphorical daily bread. What is God asking you to trust Him with? Does simple mean having a simplified calendar that frees you to be present with the needs of your friends and neighbors as they arise? I don't have a solution for a simplified calendar, but one way that I'm pressing into it in this season is by leaning heavily on a carpool. That does simplify things and free time for me to be present. Does it mean simplifying your budget? As you are reviewing your finances as this year comes to an end, or as you're anticipating additional income next year, where have you made space to give generously? Or maybe simple could apply to some messy relationships in your life. The writers of the updated BIC Core Values book suggest this. We can work towards simplified relationships, uncluttered by secrets, records of wrongs committed, or whatever mess we've allowed to fester. Simplified relationships that allow space for God's abundance to flow. And all this points to, I think, that bigger truth that generosity is about more than our resources or lack of resources. I said before, it was in the place of plenty that the Israelites learned scarcity, and they learned generosity in a wilderness place. So generosity can become a posture for us, a way of moving through the world rooted in God's abundance of love and joy, peace, and patience, and all of the fruits of the Spirit. And we learn that posture one small step at a time. When we choose to notice what God provides, when we deal with the barriers as they arise, and when we place in Jesus' hands what we have, God will meet us there with His abundance. So as we close our time together today, I would like to read a modified excerpt from a prayer from Every Moment Holy. And the full prayer is called A Liturgy for Those Who Have Done Harm, which may seem like an odd choice to you this morning, a liturgy for those who have done harm. Today we talked a little bit about barriers. At some point in our lives, that has been all of us. When we search our hearts, and we find sins that act as barriers between us and God and others, and that block God's abundance from reaching others. And he is faithful to forgive those sins and to help us walk forward with renewed ability to live for him and to walk generously in community with others. It is not easy. That's true. It's not easy. Sometimes our steps forward are fumbling and stumbling ones. But God does meet us there with his abundant mercy and his steadfast love. So let's pray. Jesus, you said you came so that we may have life abundant. We desire to live with you and with one another in that life. So we ask you to search our hearts, to show us those things that stop the flow of your living water. Restorer of all things, redeem the damage we have done to ourselves and to one another. Restore, remake, rekindle, rebuild, heal, comfort, and repair. Knit together all that we have rent. Lord, we know that our tendency is to hide our ill desires and temptations, allowing them to give birth to sinful action. Therefore, bless us with the fellowship of true community, bonded by holy love, that walks together in transparency, conviction, and generosity of spirit. We are always, every moment, in need of you.